So awesome, everyone. Okay, so we're going to be finishing up on the second half of chapter one here. We're going to be talking about the major aspects of American political culture. Remember, I mentioned to you all last time that there's three major components of American political culture. So we're going to talk about those three components here: liberty, equality, and democracy. We've already touched on democracy a little bit, but we'll go a little bit more in detail into democracy. We're also going to talk a little bit about political efficacy right now, in terms of what that means, as well as how Americans view government in general. So that's pretty much what we're going to cover, as well as a couple of key demographic information statistics that we'll definitely go over. So with that being said, everyone, let's go ahead and get started here really quickly. And please, as always, please let me know if you all have any questions. Please raise your hand here on the Collaborate system if you all have questions about anything that we're going to be covering. And and again, as always, if you all have any further questions, you all are more than welcome to email me here. So okay, let me go and share the screen, and then we'll get started here. So okay. And also, if there's anything that doesn't make sense from what we talked about last time, feel free to also ask questions about that as well here. So okay, so let's talk a little bit about political participation, political efficacy here, and then we'll get a little bit into some of these stats here. So political efficacy is another important ingredient in political participation. Political efficacy is the belief in the ability to influence what government does. So last time we talked about political knowledge and why political knowledge is extremely important, understanding the way political systems are set up. You need to know the ground rules of the political systems that we live in, because if you don't know those ground rules, you're not going to know how to actively engage and how to actually participate, fully as informed citizens should, right? And as I said last time, everyone, I do understand that it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Our government is not the easiest thing to understand. You would think that it would be kind of straightforward, right? But when you see that there's different levels of government, when we get to the federalism chapter 3, which I think I've said before, not in this class, but I've said before in other classes, that federalism tends to be probably the hardest chapter for my students to understand, because it's very theoretical. There's a lot of theory that goes into this idea of different levels of government having different responsibilities. We don't live in a system where we just have one government and they handle everything. Instead, we have a system where you have multiple levels of government and they handle different things, right? So, the federal government handles, like, the post office, handles immigration, state government handles state law, education, as well as law enforcement, and then local government handles the public works, the water and the waste disposal, right? So most people don't know that, right? Most people don't know that there's different levels of government and they have different responsibilities, right? So I do understand that it is rather complex, right? So having important political knowledge, and we're kind of building on what we talked about last time, right? Having that political knowledge is extremely important. And so with that political knowledge, with understanding the way the systems operate, at least the way they're supposed to, with more political knowledge, you can also gain political efficacy. Political efficacy builds on political knowledge, which, again, it's this idea that because you know what's going on, because you're informed, because you know the questions to ask, who to ask those questions of, then you can be involved in government. You can try to advocate for what you believe in. You can try to be active within within our government, right? Because this is one of the main reasons why people aren't really all that active, is because they don't know where to start. They don't know, because they don't know the levels of government, because they don't know how government is supposed to operate. They don't know who to ask. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do, right? So they feel like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to educate themselves on it. So they just complain, because that's a lot easier to do, right? But to actually do something about your complaints is going to take a lot of work. And even if you do know what's going on, it still doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get things changed, right? Because there's a lot of other factors that go involved in government, which we're going to talk about, like interest groups and the power that they have and things like that. So I'm not trying to discourage anyone, but again, there's also a lot of there's a lot of inner workings that also goes into how government operates, right? So again, but the idea of political efficacy in terms of its basic form, is this idea that you feel that you can influence government because of the political knowledge that you have. So these two polls kind of reflect how societal it kind of reflects how there's been a shift in society in terms of how they view government, right? So in the 1960 poll, one quarter, 25% of respondents said that elected officials did not care what citizens like themselves thought, right? So this is a small number, right? Only 25% of Americans thought this, right? So 75% of Americans felt that elected officials did care about what the citizens thought about their job and what they were doing. But if we fast forward to 2015, you'll see that now it's pretty much flipped, right? Where now it's the opposite, right? Now more than three quarters, 76%, disagreed with the statement that the government benefits all the people it represents, right? So now instead of only 25% of people not agreeing with not necessarily that they're not agreeing, but 25% of people felt that the government didn't care about what they thought. Now that number has gone up to 76%. Now most people uh, don't really think that the government cares about what they want or that the government works for everyone. So you can see that there's been this monumental shift in the last half a century in regards to how Americans view government. Now, before we move on, let's kind of break this down a little bit. I mean, what do y'all think about these numbers here? I mean, do you all agree with this? Disagree with this? Do you all agree with the 76% that they feel that they don't feel that the government benefits everyone, that they feel that maybe it benefits only a certain few? Does anyone agree with this or disagree with this? I mean, what do y'all think about these numbers here? And also not just your own personal take, but why do you think these numbers have changed? Why is it that now most people don't really, they don't really feel that the government works for them? And we're also going to take a look at trust in government a little bit later on. Let me see who's got the the hand up. Let's see. Let me check. Okay, Dariana, go ahead.
I believe that the government does not really care about what most people actually want now. I believe that the numbers have like shifted. Government was first based on power to the people, but now it feels more like it's more centralized and it's more towards like the elites and business owners and it's more like Republican, you know?
Right, Dariana. Yes, you are right in that the public perception is that the system is more rigged. It's not necessarily for the common person. That the rich and the wealthy tend to have more influence, as opposed to maybe the common person, especially because of a lot of the money in politics, which we're going to get into a little bit later when we get to the interest groups chapter. Um, what is interesting though is that in the history class I'm going to be teaching later on today, I'm actually going to be talking about the Gilded Age, and I don't know if you're all familiar with the Gilded Age, right? And how this is where a lot of that income and wealth inequality really started, with a lot of these these financiers and these business people like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and how they consolidated all of these corporations like into U.S. Steel. And Standard Oil and all that. And so yeah, it has been going on for a while, but maybe now people are starting to really get a sense for, I guess, what's going on. Does that kind of make sense a little bit to you all? And that
Yeah.
this has been an issue within the United States in terms of the income inequality. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I also feel like like I said before, it used to be more like what the people wanted, and people they cared more about keeping their positions and pleasing the people, but now it's more about like pleasing the elites and keeping themselves in power, because the elites, it's beneficial to them, not necessarily to all the people.
Right, right. And there is a lot of logic to what you're saying, exactly, because ideally, um, elected officials should be concerned about what the people think about them, because, right, the people are supposed to be the ones that have the power to actually keep, these people in power, whether to vote for them or to vote for someone else. But as we're going to talk about later on, we're seeing that it's not quite so straightforward, right? There's also the issue of the money in politics and how, these politicians have to get donations, and a lot of these politicians get donations from these these super PACs, these corporations, and things like that. It's a lot easier to get money that way as opposed to doing the work and actually trying to get money, individual donations from the people, right? Because people don't have the kind of money that the corporations have. So in terms of fundraising, it's a lot easier just to get money from the corporations. So
Yeah,
yes,
judges
I'm
that
sorry.
like the judges, that their whole campaign is funded by elites, and then that their like decisions, may feel biased because like towards the person that funded their campaign because it's kind of like rigged, you know?
Yes, and yes, you bring that's from the Texas government, right? Where you saw that the only people that were really donating to the judges were the attorneys, and they were
Yeah.
usually the attorneys that had cases pending with these same judges, right? So it's really hard to separate yourself. Like if you're one of these judges running, you're going to remember who donated to your campaign and who didn't, right? It's just human nature, right? So yes, you definitely do bring up a lot of issues when it comes to um, the not necessarily the system itself, but the way the system. What I'm trying to say is that the way the system operates is not necessarily. There are some issues with the way the system operates. I guess I don't know if that kind of makes sense in terms of what I'm saying. That ideally we want to have a democratic society where fair and independent elections is what determines who has the right to be elected. But there's also some of these other factors that go into it, and unfortunately these other factors have become a little bit more pronounced. It's not just quite so straightforward as just, okay, whoever gets the most votes wins, because that's the way it's supposed to be. But how they get these votes is also something that we need to look at as well. I don't know if any of that kind of makes sense to you in terms of the way the system is operating. That kind of makes sense, or not really? I guess so. Does anyone have any other thoughts on this in terms of kind of what we're talking about here? Or Dadiana, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I just spoke and my microphone was off, but I just said yeah that it does make sense.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, yeah, and very interesting, and we'll definitely will come back to this topic later on throughout the class because yeah, and don't just take my word for it. There's a lot of articles and research that goes into discussing some of these issues in terms of how the American democratic system does have some issues, especially when it comes to the money in politics and things like that, which we definitely will talk about more so when we get to the interest groups chapter. Okay, very good. All right, so let's kind of continue here really quickly. Let's see where we're at. Okay, but yeah, so just understand that political efficacy is that ability is the belief in the ability to try to influence what government does here, right? So yeah, let's kind of run through these demographic numbers really quickly, and then we won't take too much time on them because a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. But let's kind of go ahead and uh, go through these numbers here really quickly here. So okay, so then so we just had the recent census a couple years ago. Did you all participate in that census? Well, I mean, you kind of had to, right? You definitely had to because it's the law. But what's interesting in this chapter is that we do see how the population has really shifted in terms of not just in terms of the growth of the United States, but also who does live in the United States in terms of the racial demographics, right? So the United States has grown in population from 3.9 million in 1790 to 327 million in 2018, and that number has gone even higher with the recent census information that we just had in 2020. With this growth has come increasing diversity. In 1790, 81% of Americans could trace their roots to England and Northern Europe, right? Because this, of course, is who was living in the colonies, right? Mostly people from Great Britain, a few Germans as well, but for the most part, it was those Northern European countries, right? Then in 1990, during the Ellis Island times, right, with the Statue of Liberty, this is where you started to see an increasing number of Americans were from Southern and Eastern Europe. This is where you started to see like the Italians coming over, right? The Russians, the Polish people, right? All these, people on, towards Eastern Europe as well as, Southern Europe, like the Italians, right? And so after World War I, then Congress limited immigration and established the national origins quota system. So we will talk a little bit about, some of these immigration policies, like when it comes to Native Americans as well as the Asian Americans as well. So U.S. citizenship. So most people of African descent were not officially made citizens until 1868 with the introduction of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which conferred citizenship on the freed slaves. We will talk about the post-Civil War amendments a little bit later when we get to the Civil Rights chapter. We'll talk about the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery, the 14th Amendment, which provided citizenship rights to the newly freed slaves, and also provided equal protection for them so they could be fully integrated within society, right? Because they had to be done in that order, right? You had to first abolish slavery, then you had to make, the former slave citizens, and then the 15th Amendment providing voting rights for them, at least for the males. But again, we'll talk more about this when we get to the Civil Rights chapter, chapter 5. So the first census did not count Native Americans. Native Americans weren't actually offered citizenship status until 1924. And of course, Native Americans are definitely an interesting group, right? Because they have U.S. citizenship, but they have that dual citizenship, right? Where they have U.S. citizenship, but they also have citizenship within their tribes. Interesting. Let me share an interesting fact about myself and I'm still working on this. I am 1/4 Native American on my dad's side. My dad's not around anymore. Neither is my grandmother, but my grandmother was on my dad's side was a full-blooded Yaqui Native American. They're mostly in the Sinaloa area as well as in Arizona. But I have no way of being able to prove this because I don't have any official documents. It's something that I'm going to try to work on. I don't have time for this, but it's definitely something that I need to try to accomplish. There's just so many things I'm working on, but I definitely need to try to see if I can get that official designation. Because right, if you're at least 1/4, you do count as Native American. So I am Native American. I don't have the documents for it, because again, how am I going to get those from Mexico? But I'll figure it out one day. I'll definitely will figure it out. But I just wanted to share that little tidbit about myself really quickly. So historically, immigration policy has been biased against non-whites. Until 1870, only free whites could become naturalized citizens here. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 outlawed the entry of Chinese laborers into the United States, right? So again, kind of going back to history a little bit, right? During the time of, after the United States was able to win over California from Mexico in the Mexican-American War, then of course we had the California Gold Rush, and we also had the Transcontinental Railroad that was making its way westward. So in order to build the railroads, they needed labor in order to help build these. And one of the largest groups, one of the largest labor groups was the Chinese immigrants, coming over from China, right? So unfortunately, they were highly discriminated against. They were banned from being able to emigrate. Not anymore, of course, but starting in 1882, this was the banning of immigration from China. And then in 1970, the census officially counted persons of Hispanic origin and noted they could be any race. So I don't know if any of y'all, not just when you fill out the census, but if any of y'all have ever filled out for job applications, have y'all noticed that there's a section in your job application where you can fill out your demographic information, right? Like what race, do you affiliate yourself? And in those options there, it does give you an option to put one or two races, right? Or multiple races, something like that. Which I always do that. I always put that since I consider myself both white as well as Native American, and then Hispanic being my ethnic group, right? So the census does allow now to have more of that diversity when it comes to the options that you can put in your demographic information, right? And of course, there's also, of course, and of course, in more recent times, of course, there's also gender identity and the gender fluidity and all that that's going on, with all that stuff, and so that's of course something that's a little more recent, but that's another example of how people's identity is definitely something that that is it's something that people are definitely taking ownership of, and it's something that people are definitely and as I've always said, I mean, it's your life. I've always felt like that about how people want to identify them with themselves. That's totally on them. It's like if let's say you have a nickname, right? And then that's how you want to be called. I mean, that's how you want to be called. I mean, that's it's your name, right? So I mean, I've never had a problem with in terms of how people identify themselves. But again, that's a whole other thing. So anyway, okay, so let's kind of scroll over really quickly. There's some good stats there. which you all can look at later on. So by 1965, Congress had lifted strict immigration limits. This resulted in new waves of immigration from Asia and Latin America. So this is where most of the immigration now comes from, right? It's not the way it was back during the the turn of the 20th century with a lot of the immigrants coming over from Europe. Now most immigration comes from Latin America, usually from Mexico, because of course obviously of course we share that international border with Mexico, as well as other Latin American countries from Central and South America, but also from Asia as well. We have a lot more Asian immigration coming over, and not just from China, but also like Southeast Asia and Southern Asia, right? Like India, as well as Vietnam and some of these other Southeast Asian countries as well, right? So this is where the Philippines is another example of where we have a lot of immigration coming from some of these countries here. Right? So the current breakdown of the demographics is the United States is 61% white, 5% Asian, African American 13%, and Latino Hispanic 18%, right? So Hispanics make about almost 20% of the population. Again, these numbers are a little bit outdated because this is from 2016. The next PowerPoint will have, once the new edition comes out, we will have more of that updated demographic information. But we have been seeing that the Hispanic population has been rapidly growing, and so I bet you it's probably over 20% already. So, but again, we'll have more of those updated information once we get the new PowerPoints here. Okay. So again, also of course, let me see. There was a question in the chat here, really quick. Oh, sorry about that. Question in the chat here, or a point here. Let me see. How accurate is this though? Because up until recently, we were being trained to select white. Well, yes, Aldo, that is correct in that this is more of a recent development where because you absolutely are right. Back in the olden days. Hispanics were kind of being discouraged that they were being discouraged, unfortunately, from they were being discouraged in terms of identifying, with their actual cultural identity, right? In terms of their actual ethnic identity, so to speak, right? Yeah, I remember that, when I was younger too, right? That we've been told, that we have to identify as white, that if you remember back, this isn't really too old of history, but back in like the 1950s and 40s, right? I mean, Hispanic students would get in trouble in school for speaking Spanish, right? Spanish was banned in the schools. This is what led to the formation of LULAC, in Corpus Christi, in it was 1917, 1918, something like that, around that time, or in the early 1920s. Because they were looking to fight back against the discrimination of Hispanics in the schools, right? So of course they've expanded, their scope more, but that's why originally they were founded. But you're absolutely right, yes, that unfortunately, Hispanics have been, society has tried to label them as white. That also leads us to the interesting case of Hernandez v. Texas, which we'll talk about in the civil rights chapter. Sorry about that. We'll talk about that as well. But yes, you absolutely are right that that has been what had originally been encouraged and was being pushed on people pushed on Hispanics. But now, of course, there's a lot more of this. There's a lot more flexibility now when it comes to identity. Even the term Hispanic, some people don't like that term, right? Some people prefer Latino, Chicano. There's also the Latinx going on, which honestly isn't really all that popular with a lot of people within the Hispanic culture. Which, again, I've always said, like I said, everyone, I've always said, you know what, you just go with what you feel comfortable with, and it's not really anybody's business in terms of telling you how you want to be labeled or what term you want to use. So I use the term Hispanic just because that's just what I grew up with. It doesn't have anything to do with my political affiliations or anything like that. It's just what I'm used to, right? Yeah, Chicano derives from Mexico, right? Yes, exactly, yes. So everyone is yes, no, you're exactly right on that, and like I was saying, that there's a lot of reasons for why these different terms are used, right? There is context for these terms, and so I'm glad that you're well versed in this, so that way people can definitely know, like, what these terms mean and the significance of them. And yes, exactly. So it's all very interesting, right? I definitely find it very interesting. I teach the Mexican American Latinx politics class. I'm teaching it this semester, and it is interesting, as well as the books and the graduate classes I've taken on Latino politics. It really is interesting to see like how there is a lot of versatility and there is a lot of diversity within the Hispanic community itself, right? Because we have to remember that Mexicanos are not the only Hispanic group, right? There's differences between the Cuban population, the Puerto Rican population, and even more so now, the Central American and South American, population. As we get more of those groups coming to the United States, we have to, we have to, respect where they're coming from, and we also have to see the differences that they have, like, like the Salvadorians, right? And the differences that they might have, right? But yes, it's all very true, and so yes, we could be here all day talking about like Hispanic politics, right? But it is very interesting, and that's why if any of you all you're certainly welcome to to take the class. It's a class that we offer in the political science department. So if you need like an extra elective, or maybe if you are a political science major, then you will have to take it. But it is a very interesting class, and we do talk a lot about these different topics here. But yes, I don't know if that really answered your question, Nada, because that's because but you are right, exactly, that it is something that there has been a shift in recent years when it comes to being more respectful of Hispanic identity, and also valuing that cultural identity, that just because someone's different doesn't mean it's bad, right? It's just it's these differences are now being more respected, and they're being celebrated more, and we're having more awareness, and people are starting to to start to appreciate more in terms of the Hispanic culture and things like that. So which is always good to see. But yes, definitely very, very good. So I'm sorry, this they keep calling here. It's just it's because this is like a business line that I have here. I'm over here in the office here. Okay, let's see. Let's kind of let's see. Okay, because I want to make sure that we have enough time here. Okay, yeah. Let's go ahead and move to the American political culture here really quick. Or let's see. I think we have. Let's see. I think we have enough time here. Let me just sure. I just want to make sure because I know there's a couple more things I want for us to talk about here. Let's see. Okay, well, we can talk about, yeah, we can, okay, let's see. Okay, yeah. So let's kind of head back here. Okay, let me share the screen now really quickly. Okay, sorry about that. Because I have all these tabs open here. Let me get this going. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about. Okay, let's continue on with immigration here, right? So immigration has also diversified the nation by religion here. So we definitely will talk a little bit more about some of this diversity here later on when we get to like freedom of religion in the civil liberties chapter. But by 2016, less than half of Americans identified themselves as Protestant, right? So of course, if you all remember from your U.S. history class, of course, Protestantism, of course, was the dominant religion in the United States. If we're talking about the beginnings of the United States over in the Northeast, right? This is where you had the Puritans coming over, leaving England because they did not see eye to eye with the Anglican Church, which before which is interesting, right? Because King Henry VIII did not see eye to eye with the Catholic Church, right? So again, it's not really all that uncommon to see different disagreements within these different religious faiths and things like that, right? So the United States, of course, when it was founded over there, was mostly a Protestant country, right? But now that has changed a lot, and there's and not just with immigration, but also with the diversity of the land that the United States was able to acquire. With the Louisiana Purchase, obviously, of course, the French being Catholic, so that would increase the French the Catholic population a bit, although there wasn't really that many French people living there, but still increased it nonetheless. And then the current American Southwest, that it used to belong to Spain and then belong to Mexico, obviously, of course, a lot more tenets of Roman Catholicism there as well. So now, in terms of the religious affiliation, we see the Catholics make up 20%. We have 2% of the Jewish faith, and the Muslim faith is 1%. But what we've also seen that's interesting is the growing percentage of Americans report no church affiliation. And within these numbers is also a growing number of of atheism, right? Obviously, of course, the belief in no religion, right? So we've also seen more of those numbers, grow as well, right? Because church affiliation, it can be, it's not necessarily synonymous with atheism, because this could also mean people who aren't practicing religion, like they believe in a faith but they don't really practice it. So you kind of see that a lot as well here. So we have seen more of this shift in terms of religious diversity, right? And I don't know if you all have seen that there's also even more religious diversity here in the Valley, right? Which again, we'll talk more about this when we get to freedom of religion, right? But what freedom of religion has allowed is it has allowed for there to be more of this diversity, right? Where I've seen, that there's a mosque over here in McAllen near Nicky Rowe High School, right? There's a couple of synagogues also in the McAllen area. There's also the Scientology church over in Harlingen, right? So that's the brand new religion that all the movie stars like, right? So like I think like Tom Cruise and all them. So even new religions can proliferate because of the freedom of religion, which we'll talk about later on here, right? So age, geography, and the socioeconomic status of a population can impact politics. Different age groups have different needs for public services. The increasing number of Americans live in urban areas, and issues of concern are often different from rural areas. So, as well as economic inequality is on the rise, and the incomes of the middle class have largely stagnated, right? So these are some of the major cultural, demographic, and socioeconomic issues that Americans are kind of facing, right? And a lot of those differences, right? That politics are going to be different depending on the region that you live in, right? If you live in a big urban cosmopolitan area, then obviously, of course, your needs and concerns in your community are going to be different than someone who lives out in a rural community, because those communities are very different, right? They have different needs, and so there's going to be different there's going to be different political affiliations and different political issues depending on where you live, as well as different age groups, right? Political issues for younger people are going to be different from older people, right? Because they're in different stages in their life, and same thing with richer people are going to have different political needs and concerns than poorer people or the middle class. And as it mentions here at the bottom here, sadly the middle class has stagnated, right? We've been seeing, for the last couple of years, you all have been seeing the inflation, right? And how inflation has been an issue, and it's been affecting, pretty much all of us, right? Because I don't think any of us in here are rich, right? I know if I was rich, I probably wouldn't be in this class, right? I wouldn't be teaching this class if I was rich. So we're all here for for similar reasons, right? We're trying to move up in life, but unfortunately, this inflation that has caused for the prices to really skyrocket. I mean, I know everyone's been making fun of the egg prices, right? Have you all seen the memes of that? Like, I see some of those funny memes where instead of I saw the one where instead of like what is it, like instead of going to Jared, for the nice fancy rings, they go to HEB to get an egg. It's funny. So I've been seeing some of those funny memes, right? Or the one with the chicken where the chicken's all wearing the Gucci bag because of the price of eggs. It's really funny. So but yeah, so that of course has been something that we've been dealing with. But even before that, right? We have been dealing with inflation in other areas, right? It's just that the egg prices are kind of what's really driving some of these issues, right? So excuse me, but yeah, we'll definitely talk a little bit more about this throughout the class here. I'm sorry, let's see. Somebody else made a comment here. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Prior to eggs, it was wood. Yes, you're exactly right. The lumber prices were out of control. And then of course we also had the supply chain issues, right? It was hard for people to to buy certain items because the COVID pandemic had disrupted the supply chains and all those things. Um, so everyone was complaining about, oh, I can't get a PS5, and I'm like, well, is that something we really need? I guess for some people they need it, but yeah, for a lot of these luxury items, yeah, they were definitely there was shortages for these items. But okay, really quickly. Okay, so we're almost done here for today. Okay, let's get to the major. Let's get to the kind of. I don't necessarily want to say the most important aspect of this chapter, but this definitely is what I want you all to focus on more. Okay, let's get to the major aspects of political culture here really quickly as we wind down our class period today here. Which, by the way, really good discussion, everyone. We've been having some good conversations and discussions here. Okay, so let's get to let's get to the American political culture, which is what the title of the chapter is, right? So what unites a nation? So Americans do not share a common bloodline or heritage because of the diversity that we've seen with the demographics. So what unites the nation? What makes people that live here? What makes them uniquely American, right? When compared to other countries in the world, and what usually is the common uniter is this idea, is this political culture idea, right? Political culture is defined as the broadly shared values, beliefs, and attitudes about how the government should function. This basically means what do the people of a community, how do they what do they think about government? What should government do or should not do? How should government make those decisions? All of those different political questions that we've kind of mentioned before. The way the public views politics is what political culture is, right? It's how people view society in general and government's role within society. So there's a lot of different factors that go into political culture, right? Which we'll talk more about that in chapter 6 when we talk about religion. We'll talk about family. We'll talk about age and experiences, and professions also can influence people's political ideologies and things like that. But the three that we're going to focus on today: American political culture emphasizes the values of liberty, equality, and democracy here. So again, we've already talked a little bit about democracy, but we'll go more into detail on it, and we're going to talk about liberty now here. So liberty, right? You all have probably heard of liberty, right? This is this is like America's probably of the three, this is probably the one that is most uniquely American, right? No ideal is more central to American values than liberty. Liberty is defined as freedom from government control, right? We also have two aspects of liberty. There's personal freedom and economic freedom. So again, liberty is this idea that people should be free to make their own personal decisions with as little government involvement as possible. And we see this within society, right? America is probably considered the freest society, the freest country in the entire world because of the immense freedom that we have here, right? The government is only supposed to get involved when it absolutely must. And once it no longer needs to, it must vacate and it must allow for people to have those personal freedoms, right? When we're talking about personal freedom, we're talking about, the ability to, if you want to go drive somewhere, and you're obeying the speed limit and you're obeying the traffic laws, then the police shouldn't be able to pull you over just to do like a spot check, right? Or if, let's say, you're in your house and the police knock on your door and they say they just want to do a quick inspection to make sure you're following the law, that's not allowed in a society that has liberty, right? Because the police are only supposed to be there if they have a just reason to be there, right? If they got the probable cause, if they have a legit reason to be there, that's the only time that they should be there, right? They should not be going and snooping around and intruding upon your personal freedom and things like that, right? I mean, we see this, with all kinds of aspects, right? The government isn't telling you to come study at STC, right? I mean, that was a personal decision that you made on your own, right? The government's not telling us, what kind of car to buy, what color of the car, right? Or things like that, right? Those are our personal decisions that are supposed to be left, to our liberty, right? And then, of course, we also have what's called economic freedom, right? The ability to decide for ourselves how we want to proceed in this life when it comes to, our economic standing within society in terms of the careers we want to pursue, right? Thomas Jefferson talked about this, right? The life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? We get to define what happiness is for ourselves, right? Everyone is different in terms of what they consider happiness, right? Some people want to have a huge house with, lots of fancy cars. Some people are just fine with just a roof over their head, right? Everyone's different in terms of what they define success and what they define as economic freedom. But the idea is that the government is supposed to, allow for you to make those decisions and also to get out of the way of the economy, so to speak, right? That leads us to the idea of limited government and laissez-faire capitalism, right? The idea of limited government is the principle of constitutional government in which powers are limited. We touched on this a little bit, right? And we'll talk more about this in chapter 2, right? That according to liberty, we don't give the government more power than what it needs. We only give it enough to do what it needs to do, and we are not supposed to give it any more power than necessary, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about this, right? In terms of how the anti-federalists were very much about limited government. They were fearful of the federal government having too much power, and so they were not in favor of the expansion of too much power to the national government. But again, we'll talk more about this in chapter 2. And then like I said, the idea of laissez-faire capitalism, which I'm sure you all have heard of before, right? This goes back to this idea of economic freedom, because it's not just economic freedom for us, but economic freedom within the economy, economic freedom for society, right? The idea of laissez-faire capitalism is it's a free market economic system with minimal or no government interference, right? So the idea behind laissez-faire capitalism and what it has to do with economic freedom is that it shouldn't be the government telling us where to work, what to do. It should be the free market that should dictate, which jobs are lucrative. The free market will dictate, what the wages are going to be. The free markets will also take the lead on economic decisions, right? Because the idea behind laissez-faire capitalism is that it defers to the business people, right? Because the idea is that, since they're the business people, they've run successful businesses, they probably, most likely they may know more about business than maybe, people in government, right? If let's say some of these members of Congress who have never owned a business, they might not necessarily have the training and the expertise that these business people, right? And so that's why in American society, we tend to defer to a lot of these business people. Again, this going back to my discussion on the Gilded Age later on for my history class, that's where we started to see, the fascination with all these billionaires, right? So everybody always talks about Elon Musk and all that. That's not new. People were talking about John D. Rockefeller back in the 1800s, right? It's just America's always been fascinated with like the rich and things like that. It's an interesting concept, right? I guess for me, I think it's because people want to be like them. So they ascribe to that, right? They feel that, hey, if Elon can do it, then I can too, right? In terms of the way they see it, right? So the way people who tend to be fascinated with the lives of the billionaires and things like that. But yeah, so that's the idea of free market capitalism, right? We kind of let the private sector do its own thing. The government only interferes when it needs to, like in the case of a severe emergency, like with the COVID pandemic and everything got shut down. So the government was sending out the stimulus checks. Because it was just it was one of those once in a lifetime things, right? The government's not going to be sending out checks all the time. It's just, just to make up for, people who had lost work, and, it was one of those emergencies, right? So that's an example of when the government will step in. But usually the government's not going to step in if, let's say, the stock market has a bad day. It'll work itself out. The stock market is looked at as like a living, breathing organism that it's going to have its good days and its bad days, so to speak. So the government's not going to panic just because the stock market goes down a bit. Now, if it goes down a lot, of course, that's another story. But if it's just, ebbing and flowing, then that's that's kind of looked at as just normal, normal things like that. Okay, so moving on to equality, right? So the Declaration of Independence. Let me also ask you all: does anyone have any questions about liberty? Does liberty make sense to you all? Is that any questions on liberty? Does that make sense in terms of how liberty is defined and what it is? Nobody has any questions on liberty? Okay, no questions. Okay, sounds good, everyone. Okay, so let's move on to equality now, really quickly. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence declares that all men are created equal. Principles of equality include the equality of opportunity and political equality. So, of course, equality. I mean, equality, of course, is very simple, right? The idea of people, being equal. When we look at Thomas Jefferson's, declaration that all men are created equal. Equality is important within American society, right? Because if you remember, and we'll talk more about this in chapter 2, right? If you remember from your history class, why Thomas Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, obviously, of course, with the issues that they were having with Great Britain and King George III. But the issues that the American colonists had was that they felt that they were not being treated equal, right? The no taxation without representation. They weren't being adequately represented in the parliament, so they felt that they were being treated unfairly, and they were not, it wasn't right for them to have been subjected to these unfair and unjust taxation policies when they didn't have any input in the passing and creation of those policies to begin with. So, because of this unfair treatment, the call that they, in terms of how they were being treated, the Declaration of Independence was written with this idea that that all men are created equal, and that we should have an equal right to be able to participate within our government, right? So in terms of the two principles that we see with equality, there's equality of opportunity, this is an economic equality, right? The idea that all people should have the freedom to use their talents to reach their fullest potential. This is the idea that, everyone in America should have a fair shot at success, right? That they should be able to achieve the American dream of being able to, live comfortably, have a roof over their head, and not have to worry about where their next meal is going to come from, right? They should be secure in their lives, so to speak, right? That they have everything that they need. That's kind of what the idea of equality of opportunity should be, right? That and that people should decide for themselves, right? How to reach their fullest potential. Because again, going back to what I was saying about life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, right? That everyone is unique in terms of what they feel is their fullest potential, right? And that there should always be those opportunities to try to move up within society, right? I mean, that's why you all are here in this class, right? You all, having access to public education is a great equalizer when it comes to opportunity. It's the reason why I'm teaching this class, right? I would not be able to be here and lecturing with you all today if I didn't have the education that I had, and so I was able to get that education through the opportunity to pursue my college studies. And of course, I had to do the work, right? It wasn't just going to be handed to me, right? I had to, of course, earn it. I had to go and study, and all those years of driving to Laredo and back, I had to go and do well on my tests, turn in my assignments, my research papers. But at least I had the opportunity to be there, right? And so thankfully, you all have this opportunity here as well, to move up in life and to try to achieve that level of success, right? So the idea is that everyone should have that equal opportunity to be able to be successful within American society. And then there's also political equality, the right to participate in politics equally based on the principle of one person, one vote, right? This is the idea that everyone's vote should count equally, right? One person, one vote means that everybody gets one vote, and it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is, right? It doesn't matter what your gender is. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. It doesn't. None of that matters, right? Everyone's vote counts the same. It's one person, one vote, and then ultimately elections are going to be determined by which candidate gets more votes than the other people, right? So that's what political equality is, right? Is that everyone should be treated equally within the political systems, and everyone should try to have equal access to the political systems, right? Now, we will talk a little bit later about that access, and how maybe that might not necessarily, that there might be some issues with access, when it comes to the political systems. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the idea is that in terms of the way it's supposed to be, that everyone is supposed to have, everyone's supposed to have that that one vote, and it doesn't matter whether someone's rich or poor, right? That vote still counts 1-to-1, so to speak. Okay, so any questions on equality here, really quickly, before we finish up here on our discussion here? So, okay, so democracy. Let me check the chat really quickly just to make sure that it's not. Let me check the chat to see if there's questions here. Hold on, let me check the chat really quickly. Okay, so no questions here. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back here really quick. Okay, so let's go to democracy here really quickly. Okay, and then we'll be almost done here. Okay, so democracy is also a major part of American political culture, as we've talked a little about before. In a democracy, and this pretty much defines what a democracy is supposed to look like. People choose their rulers and have some say over what those rulers do. As we mentioned before, that people choose their rulers through the free, fair, and open elections, and then once these people get elected and once they're in office, the public pressure isn't supposed to stop, right? You're supposed to keep tabs on these rulers. You're supposed to check in on them, right? You're supposed to contact them, reach out to them, keep, note how what the job that they're doing, right? I mean, this is no different than how you all treat me, right? I mean, I'm supposed to be doing my job, I'm supposed to respond to you all. I'm supposed to, have my office hours, and supposed to be able to meet with you all if ever you all need to. It's no different than these people, right? These people have that obligation to the public as well, because they're public servants. They're public servants at the highest level. My responsibilities are nowhere near as high as theirs, right? So I still try to be as responsible as I am, because my paycheck comes from y'all's tax dollars. So they need to be even more so, because they're at the top of the political system. I'm just at the bottom here. So when political authority rests ultimately in the hands of the people, it is called popular sovereignty, right? The idea that the people will decide the fate of the country, the fate of their community, right? In terms of, you all have probably heard the phrase, elections have consequences. And And that is very true, right? Elections do have consequences in that the people are ultimately going to decide what the fate of the country or the state or the city or the community that they're voting in. The people are the ones who are ultimately going to decide, right? So that's why whenever I talk to people, if people are complaining about the government, my first question to them is, well, did you vote? And if they didn't vote, well, then, I mean, sure, you can complain, but you might not necessarily have too much of a leg to stand on, right? If you're not doing all that you can to try to get your, get your point across and accomplish what you want to accomplish, uh, and get your voice heard within this government if you're not really doing anything to show for that, right? Government also follows the preferences of the majority voters, but protects the rights of the minority, right? So a democratic principle known as majority rule, minority rights. So what this means here is that while elections do have consequences, it doesn't mean that everything is just going to radically change from election to election. You probably have noticed this, right? That in the last couple of presidential elections that we've seen, it's not like it's become night and day when it comes to the governmental systems, right? Of course, a lot of that is also because the federal government doesn't control everything, right? Um, but the point I'm trying to make is that when it comes to and there have been some changes. I will take that back. There have been like some changes, especially like at the state level, but mostly at the federal level, we've seen that there a lot of things have been pretty much kind of staying rather similarly. You don't have like all like the federal bureaucracy getting fired and then having new people come in, right? There is that consistency, but the idea is that yes, the majority rules, and the majority is going to get what they're wanting, right? So because we have a new Republican House, the Republicans in the House are going to take the lead, and they're going to push their agenda as they should because they won the election, so they have the right to do so. And so, so they have that right to do so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the entire system is going to change, right? We also have a court system that protects the rights of minorities, right? The courts are meant as a way to to ensure the constitutionality of laws that are passed by Congress or executive orders made by the president, as well as also to provide case law for some major civil rights issues, like the marriage equality case, Obergefell v. Hodges, and of course we'll talk about the overturning of Roe versus Wade as well. There's some controversy there, right, in terms of what that does for for minority rights, especially the rights of women. But we'll get there eventually. But the idea in terms of the way it's supposed to be ideally is that it's supposed to allow majority rule to be able, for the majority to make those major decisions, but not at the expense of the minorities, right? The minorities do have rights as well. The majority doesn't control everything, right? They have to make sure that they also respect the rights of the minority, right? So let's see. Okay, let's see really quickly. Okay, let's see, because I want to make sure that we have enough time here to kind of focus on this, right? So let's see. Let's go through this really quickly. So Americans are deeply attached to the idea of democracy, but there are many concerns about how we practice democracy, right? The first boundary would be the right to vote. While more people have secured the right to vote, the ways elections are carried out can influence voter participation, right? So this is talking about some of the issues within the electoral system, which again, we'll talk about more when we get to voting and elections about, is it, are people able to access polling locations? Do voter ID laws, does that become an issue when it comes to people exercising that right to vote? What about the gerrymandering that's going on, right, with the way the districts are drawn up, right? So another consideration is the relationship between economic power and political power. Many argue that money in campaigns and elections undermines democracy, as we kind of mentioned a little while ago, and we'll talk about more later on in this class. And again, this is not a new concept, right? Even during the Gilded Age of the 1870s, that was also another issue as well. Americans tend to be conservative in theory, but liberal in practice. And then government in general, more Americans consider themselves politically conservative than liberal. And a majority of Americans said that the federal government has too much power. However, specific government programs show support. So overwhelming majorities want Social Security spending to be kept the same or increased, right? So this is kind of interesting, right? That Americans, they're kind of interesting, right? Because they tend to consider themselves more conservative. It's almost like, liberal is kind of like a dirty word for people. They don't like to use the word liberal. Even liberals themselves don't really like to use that word. So there is a lot of psychology that goes on with that, right? In terms of, even though in practice you would tend to consider yourself a liberal, but you don't call yourself a liberal, right? And I've got some theories on that as well. But yeah, so the idea is that while Americans do tend to be, rather conservative, compared to other countries, that's why whenever you mention socialism, a lot of Americans they get all scared or whatever, right? Even though socialism itself, and we'll get into socialism a little bit later in terms of what it actually is. But everyone always thinks like, oh, Venezuela, but no one ever talks about Norway, Sweden, right? That. Again, we'll talk more about that later on in terms of our class, right? Because I want y'all to have the facts in terms of what these different political systems are, and then you make your decision for yourself, right? But I want to give you all the facts here. But yeah, when we go down here to the bottom, right, that Americans, even though they tend to be conservative, they don't want to see cuts to Social Security. They don't want to see cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, all of these major government programs. Which, by the way, another interesting note that my mom is about to get Medicare. She's about to turn 65 in March, so she's very happy about that she's finally going to get her Medicare. So yeah, we'll talk about those programs a little bit later on here in the class. But yes, but Americans definitely do not want for these programs to be cut, even though these three major programs do make up a lot of the government spending here. Okay, really quickly. Okay, let's talk about trust in government really quick, and then we'll end for today. So trust in government has been low in recent years. In the early 1960s, 3/4 of Americans said they trusted government most of the time. Trust spiked after the September 11th terrorist attacks, but fell back to low pre-level attacks within 3 years. And in 2015, only 19% of Americans trusted the government. So yeah, this definitely makes a lot of sense as to why you would see a spike in trust in government after 9/11, because this is, of course, when people were at their most frightened, and they looked to government to help. They looked to government for protection, right? But now again, this is probably a little. I can't believe this was 20 years ago, right? I vividly remember this because I was you all's age. I was in college when the Patriot Act was being was being trotted out, and there was a lot of controversy, right? Well, I guess not all of us, right? But the point is that we had a lot of discussions, right, about the Patriot Act and how and that contributed to people not trusting government anymore, right, because of the pervasiveness of the surveillance, right? Does anyone remember that? I don't know if y'all. Let me see. Let me go to the chat really quick. Americans don't appreciate being lied to. Transparency is key. Yes, exactly, Elder. Yes, Americans. If we're going to trust our government, we expect for our government to. Yes, Snowden. Yes, and his situation, right? With the leaks and all that stuff, right? But you're exactly right that Americans definitely do expect for our government to. I mean, because they're the top, right? I mean, if if the government gets away with things, then why can't we? I mean, right? We expect for our government to set the example. We expect for our government to to do the right thing because they're at the top of society, right? I mean, we expect that of people who put themselves out there and take the lead in leading us. But if they're not going to adhere to their own rules, then why should we? I mean, that's definitely. Americans did not consent to the surveillance. Yes, you're exactly right. Yes, because the Patriot Act, which we'll talk about a little bit later, was very controversial, right? There was reports that back when people did check out books at the library, certain that if somebody checked out a certain book, then they would be like put on like this this secret list or things like that, right? The wiretapping. It was definitely something where Americans felt that went too far, right? That yes, while 9/11 was a horrible event, did it justify the spying of people, right? And then of course there was also the whole Guantanamo Bay situation, right? And what happened with the enemy combatants and all that stuff. I remember that very vividly. We were having those same. I was in you all's position, right? We were having those discussions with my professor back 20 years ago. So we were definitely having those spirited discussions. But yeah, so okay, so I think that pretty much covers everything that we need to cover for chapter 1, everybody. So I'm glad we had like a really good discussion on a lot of these really interesting topics, and everything that we talked about here, we are going to expand more later on in the class because, like I said, this is kind of like the intro chapter. So we will discuss more about the Patriot Act. We will discuss more about some of these civil liberties issues, like your First Amendment right to freedom of speech, Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches and seizures, and things like that. So we definitely will touch on that as we progress later on in the class. So before I let you all go, does anyone have any questions for today? Anybody have any questions or anything else? So just note that the only thing you'll have to do for chapter one is the quiz, right? So okay, yeah, the discussions were for the intro week. So work on chapter one quiz now. Okay, so now that we finished chapter one, go ahead and work on the first quiz, and then we'll start on chapter two next time. Yeah. So chapter two we'll discuss the founding of the Constitution. There's going to be a little bit of history on that. We're going to go a little bit into the American Revolutionary War. The due date, I believe it's next Wednesday. I believe it. I believe that's what it is. I believe since we finished chapter one this week, I believe the due date for chapter for the first quiz is next Wednesday. Yeah, so please go ahead and get that completed. So yeah, then the first unit discussion is not going to be I mean, it's open, but don't worry about that. That's not going to be until we finish the first unit. So so chapter two, we will discuss, it's going to be a little bit of history. We're going to talk about a little bit of the American Revolutionary War in terms of not necessarily the war itself, but the lead up to the war. Why was the war fought? What were the political issues within the war? And then we'll talk about the Articles of Confederation, America's first attempt at a working constitution. And then spoiler alert, it didn't last very long. And then we'll get to the U.S. Constitution, and then we'll talk about that. So let me also just mention really quickly that, in my personal opinion, I do feel that chapter two is the most important chapter in the entire book, because everything else that we're going to talk about builds upon the Constitution, right? Because every law, every policy, every decision that's made in our country in terms of our government has to fall in line with the Constitution. It has to be constitutional. So it's important that we know what our Constitution is, we know what's in it, we know what it's about, and so please make sure that you definitely take chapter two seriously, because we will. Everything else from this class everything forward is gonna build on it. So, okay, all right, everyone. Okay, we'll go to an end for today. Thank you all so much. Take care. Please let me know if you have any questions. Have a good weekend. Stay warm. It got chilly last night, and it'll get chillier tonight. So, I mean, we are in winter, so it makes sense. But spring will be here soon. But okay, everyone. All right, you all take care. Be safe, and we'll see you all next week. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye. Bye. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.